My name is Lisa. I'm 31 years old, and I live in a city where the skyline glows more from office lights than stars. Every morning, I make a pot of black coffee, tie my hair into a low bun, and sit at the kitchen table staring out at the quiet street below before heading to work. I work in corporate strategy for a multinational firm. It's a job that doesn't fit easily into casual conversation, especially when people assume strategy means PowerPoints and buzzwords. It's more than that. It's problem solving, navigating chaos, building things behind the scenes. I love it. But if you ask my mother, she'd tell you it's not real work. At least that's what she used to say. My mom, Helen Morris, is a well-known figure in our company. She worked there for nearly 3 decades, climbing every ladder without asking for a boost. She was respected, composed, and terrifyingly efficient. I grew up hearing her name spoken with admiration and caution. Helen is sharp, they'd say. She doesn't miss a thing. At home, she was colder, not cruel, but distant. She loved structure, perfection, and reputation. My younger self tried hard to fit into the mold she had set. Straight A's, piano recitals, volunteering, no trouble, no noise. But I wasn't built for silence. And I wasn't straight either. I remember the day I told her. I was 23. I'd just graduated and landed an internship at the same company she worked at, though in a completely different division. I thought maybe if she saw me thriving on my own, she'd finally be proud. So one night, I sat her down in the living room of our family home. The TV was off. The air was still. I said, "Mom, I need to tell you something important." She nodded slightly, her gaze already guarded. "I'm gay." There was a pause, a long one. Then she exhaled through her nose, leaned back in the chair, and stared at me like I'd just confessed to a crime. "You were the biggest mistake of my life," she said. I flinched. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just stood up, walked to the hallway, grabbed her coat from the rack, and said, "I want you out by morning." That was 8 years ago. Since then, we've spoken only once, at a funeral. And even then, it was nothing more than a cold nod across the chapel. I didn't go home. I moved into a small apartment near the city, worked my way up. No shortcuts, no family help. I never told anyone at work that Helen was my mother. I didn't want a legacy. I wanted to build my own. I didn't even know she was retiring until I saw the company-wide announcement. After 29 years of service, Helen Morris will retire this July. Join us in celebrating her incredible legacy. I stared at the email for a long time, not because it surprised me, but because the photo they used, the official one, was the same headshot she kept in our living room for years, framed in gold, a reminder that excellence had a face. Heron, I wasn't invited to the retirement party. Why would I be? But what no one knew, not even her, was that 6 months earlier, the board had started grooming a new successor. Someone to take over her division and lead the entire East Coast strategy operations. That someone was me. I hadn't told a soul. Not even my closest friend at the office. I'd kept my head down, said yes to the long hours, delivered on every project. I didn't want it to be handed to me. I wanted to earn it. And I had. What no one knew yet, what she didn't know, was that the board had chosen the date of her retirement party to announce the new CEO, and that they'd asked me to be there. I didn't reply to the invite. I didn't RSVP. I didn't even open the calendar hold until 2 days before. But that night, as I sat on my balcony watching the lights flicker in the neighboring apartments, I realized something. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't even about her anymore. It was about walking into the room that had always been locked to me, not with noise, but with quiet, undeniable presence. And when her boss would eventually hand me the microphone with the words, "Please welcome our new CEO," I wouldn't need to say a single thing. Her face would say it all. I never told anyone at work that Helen Morris was my mother. In fact, I worked hard to make sure they'd never guess. Different last names, different floors, different paths. To most people, I was Lisa Carter. Efficient, quiet, A little intense maybe, but reliable. I never gossiped, never complained, never missed a deadline. I didn't attend happy hours or team brunches. I kept my head down and my output high. It's not that I didn't want to connect. It's just that I didn't know how to be half open. If I told even one part of the truth, the rest would come pouring out. The girl who got kicked out at 23. The daughter whose mom said she was a mistake. The employee who was building a life 2 doors down from the legacy that never wanted her. So I stayed silent. And in that silence, I rose. The company was shifting, evolving. Leadership was retiring, and new faces were stepping in. I started getting invited to rooms I used to walk past. The kind of meetings where decisions were made before they were emailed. I listened more than I spoke, but when I did speak, people leaned in. Then one day, about 9 months before the retirement party, I was asked to stay behind after a quarterly review meeting. I remember the room clearly. Glass walls, high ceiling, the faint hum of the air vent above us. Robert, the CFO, waited until the others had filtered out. Then he shut the door and turned to me. "Lisa," he said, "how do you feel about legacy?" I blinked. "I'm not sure I understand." He smiled. "Good answer. People who chase legacy usually ruin it." That was how it began. A conversation, a test. Over the next few weeks, I was pulled into confidential projects, strategy pivots, talent assessments. Then came the sit-down with the board. They wanted someone who could lead, not just manage. Someone sharp but steady. Someone who understood the culture but wasn't bound by old politics. I didn't ask for the title. I didn't even know it was on the table. But when they offered it, when they used the words next CEO of East Coast Operations, I didn't flinch. I said yes. Still, I told no one. I signed the NDA. I smiled through regular meetings as if nothing had changed. Even when people speculated about who might be taking over Helen's role, I kept my face unreadable. And then, about a month before the party, something strange happened. My mom called me. It had been over 7 years. The number was still in my phone, but I had never once been tempted to dial it. When it lit up my screen, I just stared at it, like it was a ghost coming back to life. I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave one. 3 days later, I got a message. Short, cold, just like her. "Heard you're still at the company. Be mindful not to make things awkward at the event." No, "How are you?" No apology, just a warning, as if I were the one with something to hide. I didn't reply. But that night, I stared at my ceiling for hours, wondering why it still hurt. Why the words still stung like they did when I was 23 and holding a duffel bag on the porch in the rain. The truth is, I didn't want revenge. I didn't want her to beg. I didn't even want her approval anymore. I just wanted acknowledgement. Not for being successful, for surviving. For growing roots in the very soil she tried to bury me in. The weeks leading up to the party passed in a blur. Meetings, emails, strategy decks. But underneath it all was the low hum of something unspoken. The knowledge that the woman who once cast me out was about to be handed a microphone in a room full of applause, unaware that her replacement, her legacy, was the same daughter she tried to erase. The day before the event, I got a call from Robert. "We're printing the cards for the event," he said. "You okay with being introduced officially tomorrow?" I took a deep breath. "I'm ready." He paused. "She still doesn't know." "No." "Do you want her to?" I looked out the window of my office. The city lights blinked against the evening sky like distant truths waiting to be seen. "No," I said. "She'll know when everyone else does." There was silence on the other end. Then a quiet chuckle. "You really are perfect for this role." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Because perfect was never what I wanted to be. I just wanted to be real. And free. And for the first time in years, I finally was. The morning of the party, I woke up before sunrise. The sky was still navy blue, and the air had that kind of early spring chill that feels sharper than winter. I wrapped a blanket around myself and sat by the window, cradling a mug of strong coffee between my palms. I wasn't nervous. Not exactly. It felt more like the stillness before a storm. Not the loud kind that breaks windows, but the quiet one that changes a landscape forever. I'd spent weeks preparing, but not in the way you'd expect. I didn't plan a speech. I didn't rehearse my smile. I didn't buy a new outfit. I already had everything I needed. A tailored navy blue suit I'd worn to my last investor presentation, a simple notebook tucked in my leather bag, and the truth, silent and waiting, resting just beneath my skin like heat before a burn. The venue was a private event hall on the top floor of our headquarters. A glass-paneled room with skyline views and polished floors. The kind of place where people clinked champagne glasses over safe goodbyes. I arrived exactly 15 minutes early, not out of eagerness, but because I needed to see the space empty before the crowd arrived. A few event staff were still setting up. White linen tablecloths, centerpieces of white tulips, soft instrumental jazz in the background. My name was already printed on a name card at the reserved table near the stage. Just Lisa Carter. No title. No hint. Perfect. I stood by the window for a while, watching the city move below. Cars, pedestrians, lives. None of them aware that upstairs something long overdue was quietly unfolding. At exactly 11:30 a.m., the first guests arrived. Executives, department heads, longtime colleagues. I knew most of them, but today I was just another face in the crowd. They shook hands, laughed, toasted early. The energy was warm, relaxed. Everyone eager to say their piece, take their pictures, and then move on. Then she walked in. Helen Morris. Perfectly on time. Tailored gray dress, silver necklace, hair pulled back with surgical precision. She looked every bit the woman the company had come to admire. Polished, efficient, untouchable. She smiled that sharp, practiced smile she always wore at events, gave a short nod to familiar faces. The crowd parted like water around her. She owned the room, just like always. Our eyes met only once, brief, no flicker of recognition, no sign of anything beneath the surface. Good. I didn't want drama. I didn't want confrontation. I just wanted the moment to arrive naturally, like the final click of a puzzle piece sliding into place. Around noon, the speeches began. A few colleagues took the mic. Kind words, laughs, polite anecdotes about Helen's leadership, her discipline, her uncanny ability to catch errors before they happened. There was applause, genuine and deserved. Then her boss, the COO, stepped forward. Gray-haired, glasses. Always looked like he was mid-thought. He smiled and glanced at Helen. "We've talked a lot today about legacy," he began. "About the impact Helen has made over the years. And it's true. She's been a force, a pillar of precision and progress." More polite applause. "But what's even more important than legacy," he continued, "is what happens next. Who carries it forward? And I'm happy to say we've made that decision." The room stilled. Heads turned. He looked directly at me. "And so," he said, "it's my great pleasure to introduce the new CEO of East Coast Operations. Please welcome Lisa Carter." There was a pause. Not just silence, but wait. Like time itself had taken a breath. Then applause. Confused at first, then enthusiastic. I rose calmly, walked to the stage, took the mic. From the corner of my eye, I saw her, my mother. She looked frozen, not angry, not even shocked. Just lost. Her face had gone pale, the color draining like water down a sink. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. I turned to face the crowd. Steady, still. My heart thudded, not from nerves, but from something deeper. Closure, maybe. "Thank you," I said simply. "It's an honor." I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. The truth had already done its job. I handed the mic back, nodded politely, and returned to my seat. Just another executive at just another event. But everything had changed. I could feel it in the air, in her silence, in mine. The applause faded, but the silence that followed stayed with me. I didn't linger after the speech. I exchanged a few handshakes, accepted a polite congratulation or two, and excused myself before the cake was cut. There was no dramatic exit, no final word, just the quiet sound of my heels echoing down the hallway as I left the venue. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. I stared at the numbers ticking by, floor after floor, trying to steady the thudding in my chest. It wasn't nerves. It wasn't even pride. It was something else. Something quieter, heavier. Relief, maybe. That I hadn't flinched. That I hadn't sought revenge or raised my voice. That I'd let the moment speak for itself. And it had. I went home and changed into an old sweatshirt. The suit went back into the closet. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't check social media. I sat on the couch with a glass of water and let the stillness settle. But around 7 p.m., my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years. Helen Morris. For a moment, I just stared at it. I thought she might not reach out at all. That she'd pretend not to have recognized me. That she'd bury it like everything else she didn't want to deal with. But here it was. A call. I let it ring. Then I let it ring again. By the third attempt, she gave up on calling and started texting. "Why didn't you tell me?" I didn't respond. A minute later, "You stood on that stage and said nothing. After everything." Another pause. Then, "Did you plan this to humiliate me?" I locked the phone and placed it face down on the table. She wasn't angry that I got the job. She was angry that she didn't see it coming. That I hadn't given her the chance to prepare a version of the story where she was still in control. A few hours passed. The messages stopped. And then, just as I was brushing my teeth, another one buzzed through. "Meet me tomorrow. Lunch, 1 o'clock, Bistro Jules." No question mark. No request. Just a line of command, like old times. I didn't reply. But I showed up. Not for her, but for myself. Because I needed to know what she would say when there was no stage, no crowd, no spotlight to shape her words. The next day, I walked into the little French cafe 5 minutes early. It was the same one she used to take me to when I was a child. Back when I still believed we were just a normal mother and daughter. She was already there, sitting in the far corner. Back straight. Hands folded neatly on the table. Her expression unreadable. I sat down across from her without saying anything. She studied me for a few seconds. "You've changed," she said. "No," I said calmly. "You just never looked." She didn't like that. I saw the flicker in her eyes, the instinct to correct, to control. "I didn't know," she said tightly. "Nobody told me." "You never asked." "I'm your mother." "You were," I said, "until the day you told me I was the biggest mistake of your life." The silence that followed was dense. She looked down at her hands, then up again, her jaw tight. I was angry, shocked. I didn't mean it. "But you said it, and you meant it enough to make me leave with nothing but a bag of clothes and a one-way bus ticket." I was scared. I tilted my head slightly. Of me? Of what people would say. There it was. The truth, raw and selfish. She wasn't afraid for me. She was afraid of what I would do to the image she'd worked so hard to build. The perfect career woman, the successful mother, the unshakable legacy. "You didn't even recognize me yesterday," I said quietly. "You looked at me like I was a stranger." Her voice softened, almost hesitant. "I wasn't expecting it." "That's the difference between us," I said. "You needed to prepare. I just needed to show up." She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Not regret, not even apology, just confusion, as if she was finally seeing me as someone she couldn't shape. "You're not who I thought you'd be," she said slowly. I picked up my bag. "No," I replied. "I'm not." And then I stood up and walked away. No tears, no raised voice. Just the sound of the doorbell chiming softly behind me as I stepped back into the street, the wind tugging at the edge of my coat. I didn't look back. Some people want closure. I've learned that sometimes silence is the closure. Returning to the office after the party felt like walking into a different building. The same elevators, the same polished floors, the same scent of burnt coffee near the break room. But the energy had changed. People looked at me differently now. Not with fear, not quite with admiration either. Just awareness. They knew who I was now. Some were polite, overly so. Others kept their distance. But a few, like the junior analysts or the new hires, looked at me with something else in their eyes. Possibility. And that made all the difference. I kept my routine steady. Arrive early, stay late if needed, answer every email within the day. I wasn't about to let the title change me. I knew better than anyone how quickly respect could vanish when power became arrogance. But there was one thing I noticed right away. My mother had left more than just an empty office behind. She'd left a culture, a way of operating that was cold, calculated, and built on fear. People hesitated to speak in meetings. They waited for permission to challenge ideas. Some teams were chronically overworked, afraid to ask for balance because they'd been conditioned to believe that burnout was a badge of honor. So, slowly, quietly, I began to undo the damage. I started with the Monday syncs. Instead of one-way reports, I opened the floor. I asked questions. I listened. It startled people at first. One manager even asked me afterward if I was testing him. "No," I said. "I'm trusting you." And trust, like anything worthwhile, took time to rebuild. About 3 weeks into the role, I received a calendar invite from HR. Exit interview debrief, Helen Morris. It was a standard follow-up. When senior leadership retires, HR compiles insights for succession planning. Most people skim it. I didn't. I read every line. It wasn't long, but one comment stood out. "My only concern is that Lisa may lack the emotional discipline to lead at scale. She's smart, but she wears her history like armor. It limits her." It was dated 2 months before the party. I stared at the screen for a while. Not out of anger, not even surprise, just clarity. Even in her final notes to the company, she had tried to minimize me. Not with slander, but with subtlety. A quiet rewriting of the narrative, one where she passed the torch to someone technically capable, but emotionally flawed. Someone who could never quite escape her own shadow. I closed the file and leaned back in my chair. She was still trying to shape me, still trying to control the story. But what she never understood was that I didn't need to be painted as perfect. I didn't need to be admired. I didn't even need to be liked. I just needed to lead, and to do it differently than she ever did. That week, I scheduled a series of one-on-ones with every department head. I didn't ask for updates or metrics. I asked how they were doing, what they felt was working, what wasn't. Some hesitated, testing me. But one by one, they opened up. By Friday, I had a notebook full of insights and a list of 5 critical areas to address immediately. And somewhere between those meetings, between the numbers and the stories, something unexpected happened. People started thanking me. Not for promotions, not for raises. For listening. For seeing them. For remembering that behind every strategy deck and quarterly goal was a person. Tired, talented, and too often overlooked. It wasn't loud praise. It was quiet gratitude. And to me, that was more valuable than any title. But not everything was as calm. The following Monday, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo, one I hadn't seen in years. It was from my high school graduation. Me in a gown, smiling awkwardly. My mother standing beside me, hand on my shoulder, eyes sharp with something that almost passed for pride. On the back, in her handwriting, was a single sentence. I thought this was who you were." I stared at the photo, then set it down on the desk. She still didn't understand. That girl wasn't the whole story. She was just the beginning. A week after I received the photo, I tucked it into a drawer at the back of my desk. Not because I was angry, but because it didn't belong on display. That picture, the moment it captured, was real. But it wasn't the whole story. It was a version of me shaped by expectation, standing beside someone who only showed affection when it looked good in photographs. I wasn't that girl anymore, and I didn't need proof to remember her. Life at the office settled into a rhythm. Meetings, milestones, late-night strategy calls. But through it all, there was a new kind of stillness inside me. One I hadn't felt in years. Not numbness. Peace. I had spent most of my 20s trying to earn what I now realized was never mine to hold. Her approval, her pride, her love, maybe. But there's a kind of freedom that comes when you finally stop performing for someone who never even stayed to watch. That Saturday, I took the train out to a quiet coastal town about an hour from the city. No work emails, no calls, just a journal, a windbreaker, and the kind of silence that doesn't demand anything from you. I walked along the boardwalk, watched the tide roll in and out, and thought about everything that had happened. Not just the promotion or the party, but the years before. The missed birthdays, the voicemail left unanswered. The moment at 23 when I stood in the rain outside her house, holding my bag and pretending I wasn't shivering. I let myself remember it all, not to dwell, but to acknowledge it. Because healing isn't about erasing what hurt. It's about understanding that the pain doesn't define you. It's just part of the road that led you to who you became. Later that evening, I sat in a small diner by the water and scribbled a letter. I didn't know if I'd send it, but I needed to write it. Mom, you once told me I was the biggest mistake of your life. And for years, I believed you. I let that sentence sit in my chest like a stone. I let it shape how I worked, how I walked, how I loved. I wanted to prove you wrong so badly, I forgot to ask if I ever needed to. But I know better now. I wasn't a mistake. I was your mirror, and maybe that's what scared you. I was the version of yourself you were never allowed to be. But I don't hate you. I just can't carry your silence anymore. I've built a life. A good one. One you never asked about, but one I'm proud of. And I hope someday, if you look back, you'll realize I didn't need to embarrass you to be seen. I just needed to stop apologizing for existing. Lisa. I folded the paper and slipped it into my notebook. I didn't seal it. I didn't address it. Some things don't need to be sent to be understood. On Monday morning, I walked back into the office like I always did. Coffee in hand, notes in my bag, hair tied back. But this time, there was no lingering weight on my shoulders. I was no longer someone trying to prove her worth. I knew my worth. That week, a junior associate stopped me in the hallway. She looked maybe 24. Nervous, determined, the way I used to be. "Miss Carter," she said, "can I ask, how did you get here?" I smiled gently. One boundary at a time. She didn't understand it fully, not yet. But she nodded like she would remember. Because that's how it begins. Not with noise, but with knowing. That Friday, I changed the nameplate outside my office door. It no longer said Executive Director. It now read simply, Lisa Carter, CEO. And below it, in smaller letters, East Coast Operations, Pacific Strategy Group. I stood there for a second, looking at it. Not because I needed to be impressed, but because it was mine. Not inherited. Not borrowed. Built. That night, I walked home instead of taking a cab. The city lights glowed like quiet stars. A cool breeze tugged at my coat, but I didn't mind. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Not because they had finally seen me, but because I had finally stopped needing them to.